Today I'm going to be talking about how to make a knotted fleece blanket. To help you follow along, I have submitted a PowerPoint that shows a step-by-step way of making a knotted fleece blanket. I have my physical blanket with me here today, so I can show you some examples as I go along my presentation. To start off, I want to clarify that there are multiple ways to make a knotted blanket. In my physical example, I chose to sew around the corners before I chose to knot the blanket. This is just a personal preference and it is not required to make this specific blanket. Before you get started, your first step is going to go to the store near you. There are multiple stores you can go to find the fabric you desire. You can go to Hobby Lobby, or you can go to Michael's or Joann Fabrics. There's plenty of them. In order to make the blanket you desire, you're going to want to go to a store that holds the fabric of your choice. You can go with different fabrics, but the most desired is the fleece one. In my example, I have a fleece. Fleece is commonly desired because it holds the knots tighter without it fraying or untying in the future. Again, if you don't want to use fleece and you don't want to worry about losing the knots, you can always choose to sew around the edges like I did. After choosing your desired fabric from your store, make sure that you measure the amount of blanket that you want to use. For an adult size, I recommend 2 yards of fabric so that it covers your entire body when you're done making the blanket. But for a baby or mid-sized child, you can cut it in half and go smaller. After getting your desired fabric, the next step is to line up the fabrics and cut off the salvage edges of the blanket. The edges of this blanket have holes. In my example, you can kind of see the phrase and there's no holes on the ends because I cut the ends. So you'll see that at the end. But you're going to want to cut those off. After you finish cutting, put the 2 wrong sides of the fabric together. The wrong sides are the frayed or the ugly sides of the blanket, and this allows you to keep the pretty sides alive on the outside of the blanket. After finishing your second step of making your fleece knotted blanket, you're going to want to put both fabrics together, flat and aligned. Grab your ruler and make sure it goes 5 inches from the start of the fabric and cut a square on the corners on the 5-inch line of the ruler. On my PowerPoint is a visual description of how you can cut the corners, so it should look like the 5 inches on each side. After doing this, you can take a yardstick or duct tape to make a straight line across the blanket as you cut. For my example, I had sewing along my trim right here, so I was always straight as I was cutting up on each fringe. 5 inches, make sure that it's 5 inches up every 1 inch apart to make a fringe across each side of the blanket. So that way when you look at the blanket, each side has fringes. There are always different ways to make sure that you are as even as you cut out your fringes. Like I said, you can use duct tape, you can sew like I did, or you can use a yardstick. After making your cuts, you can now start to make the knots on your blanket. Everyone decides to knot their blanket differently, but the strongest way is a 4-step knot. You loop it around your finger, pull the line through, and pull the fleece out. There's also a picture on my PowerPoint that explains that as well. After knotting all the sides of your blanket, you are now finished. For my fleece blanket, I chose to sew one side of my blanket so I didn't have to fringe all that fringe stuff in my face. So for my side, this is the side I sleep with, and then every other side has fringes. And then after you're done with that, you can always add extra design on top. I sewed the top of my blanket with my name, and then you can also do something on the inside if you choose. But after that, you are finished. I suggest putting it in the dryer so that way the knots get tighter and they're less likely to come apart in the future. But then your knotted blanket is complete. And thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.